Old School Texas Tough, Never Beaten, by Larry B. Litton, Jr. Old School Texas Tough, Never Beaten. That's the 6-word story I wrote about my father during my freshman year at Harvard University. My green-haired English professor told me that it was good, but that she found Southern men too parochial. I told her I found green-haired women unreasonable and disagreeable. She changed my grade to a D-, then filed a complaint against me to the Office of Equity and Inclusion. I guess it's okay for her to share her opinion, but not for me to share mine. When my dad warned me that Ivy League schools were now toxic cesspools of evil little second graders trapped in 29-year-old bodies who would hate every single thing that I thought was good and right, I scoffed, and I said that he was exaggerating. But as usual, he was exactly right. I was only one of a few Texans who got into Harvard last year, and the only one who wore a cowboy hat around campus. On the third day of school, someone filed a report against me complaining about my hat being offensive. When I asked the pink-haired student resource counselor with a bone in her nose what could possibly be offensive about a cowboy hat, she said some students were triggered by it because it conjured visions of guns and shootouts and reminded them of Southern racism and the patriarchy. I asked her if anyone had ever complained about men in double-breasted suits. Of course not, she said. Why would you even ask such a stupid question? Well, given the history of the mob up here, when I see a man in a suit, it conjures images of mob hits and reminds me of how poorly they treated women. She filed a complaint against me for harassment the very next day. I found the irony deliciously hilarious. My dad told me that I may be smart enough to get into Harvard, but that I was way too smart to stay, and that the silliness of smart rich kids and new age tenured professors would be more than I could stand. I went to Harvard wanting to become a lawyer, and in the first year, all I've learned is just how evil and racist the patriarchy is, and that men can menstruate and have babies. Now, I personally never met a dude who could do that, but Harvard apparently has a bunch of them. When I asked my biology professor how it is that 10 years ago there wasn't a single menstruating man at Harvard, and now there's a couple dozen of them, he acted offended. Why would you ask such an offensive question, Travis? He asked. I would think this would be documented as a medical miracle, I said. The fact that a man can now have a baby ranks right up there with the virgin birth. Why hasn't the scientist who accomplished this amazing feat gotten the Nobel Prize? Well, it turns out, of course, that no scientist has accomplished such a miraculous transformation. And my professor admitted as much, then filed a complaint against me for daring to question this new biological reality. The dean put me on his probation list and said I'm the first student at Harvard to manage to get 3 complaints in his first semester. He said if I got one more strike, I'd have to go in front of the review board. Well, I'm on a roll. My father would be proud. The political activists run this place. They are literally everywhere, whether they're students or faculty, and the kids who just want to get an education are too afraid to speak out against all the silliness. What I've learned about activists is that they're like vampires, only much worse. A vampire sucks your blood, but an activist sucks out your soul. They destroy everything, leaving only a miserable, joyless world in their wake. I think if you ask the average guy or gal if they'd rather have a 1-hour meeting with a political activist or an hour-long anal exam, they'd all quickly bend over and spread their cheeks. So, with Christmas break here, I've been looking forward to heading back to Texas with my girlfriend to see my mom and dad and to spend some time back in the world I grew up in. I managed to somehow find the most amazing girl right up here at Harvard. She could very well be the one. Who would have figured? Her name is Tanya, and she's from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Her father is a big-time corporate lawyer who works for Goldman Sachs, and she loves my accent, my boots, and my hat. She's the most rational, sane person I've ever met, and she's sweet in a way that reminds me a little bit of my mom. I think I'm in love with her. We booked the flight, and my parents were excited that we're coming down for Christmas. I gave Tanya the rundown on my mom and dad. My mom is 60 years old. Her name is Betty Lou, and she came from a 4th-generation blue-collar Texas family and she met my dad at a small rodeo in Fort Worth. He was riding bulls and she was barrel racing. She's the iconic image of feminine Texas tough. She's the ultimate lady, not afraid to speak her mind and utter the occasional curse word when she's annoyed, but she's not afraid to get her hands dirty. She carries herself with a degree of elegance and grace, but without the airs. She makes the meanest brisket in the whole state. She makes her own cornbread, and she's the deadliest shot with a rifle I've ever seen. I've seen her make a perfect 600-yard shot with a rifle, and then she cleaned and quartered the deer herself. She is a badass. So then I gave Tanya the rundown on my dad. He's a man of few words, and when he speaks slow and deliberate, as if every word is dripping with meaning. I know he gets angry, but the funny thing is I've rarely seen it. I asked him one time how he manages to control himself so well, and he said that men that act out of anger are fools. On the rodeo circuit, he was known as Ramblin' Randy Chadwick, and he was a rodeo god. He's 60 years old now, but in his day, he had won 11 consecutive world bull riding championships. To see him ride a bull was truly something to behold. The image of him wearing his black open-crown cowboy hat with black chaps and a red shirt with his name embroidered on the back is indelibly etched into my mind. He wore his hat low on his brow and his eyes were intense, like a storm was constantly raging in his mind. He walked with a gentle swagger, his shoulders back and his head high, and you could just tell he was cut from the granite that made a bull rider. Standing 6'2" and about 180 pounds, he was lean, with ropey muscles and large hands that were as strong as iron. He was a legend on the circuit, and all the other cowboys would line the rails and never miss him ride. They'd hoot and holler, and to see my dad on that bull was like watching raw poetry play out in real life. He didn't just ride the bull, he danced with it. He rode with an elegant rhythm, always in perfect harmony with the bull, with one hand tucked firmly under the rope and the other hand reaching out like he was waving to God. His rides were a creation of artistic perfection. Tanya is excited to meet them. We landed at Houston's George Bush Airport around 3 o'clock on the 23rd, and we rented a car and drove the hour and a half over to Brenham, where my family's ranch is located. Tanya's never been to Texas, and she's already in love with the place. We stop at Buc-ee's, and we get some fresh beef jerky, and she's memorized by the sheer size of the store and all the gas pumps and how nice the people are. "Oh my God, Travis," she says to me, "there must be 100 gas pumps here." She gets some beaver nuggets and a Coke, and she is in heaven. The lady at the register tells her that she loves Tanya's accent and that she loves her boots. And when Tanya told her that this was her first time in Texas, the lady gave her a hug. "Is everybody here so friendly?" she asked me as we got into the car. We started heading to the ranch. "Most folks are," I said. "We've got our fair share of assholes, but they're mainly in the cities." "How big is your parents' ranch?" "It's small," I said, "about 750 acres. Dad runs a couple hundred head of cattle." 750 acres is small? By Texas standards, it is. "So did you grow up riding bulls?" "Just a few," I said. "I was never good at it like Dad. I never quite got the feel for it. I was a much better steer wrestler." As we drive, we pass by some of the other ranchers on the way from my dad's place, and she's in awe of the rugged beauty of the landscape. The gentle rolling hills of the Brazos River Valley are beautiful. They're covered with amber grass that has gone dormant for the winter. The cattle are grazing, and many of the cows are pregnant, and they're not too far from calving. Texas flags are everywhere, and she smiles when she sees barns painted to resemble the Texas flag. "I'm surprised your dad even let you go up to Harvard," she says. "He didn't love the idea," I said, "but he was proud that I got in, and he said that I should give it a go. He even said that a Texan might be able to straighten out a thing or two up there." She laughed and she rolled her eyes. About an hour later, we make it to the ranch, and we drive up through the gate and up to the house. Mom and Dad are sitting in rocking chairs out on the front porch, and they have a fire going in the outdoor fireplace. We park over in the little gravel-filled lot next to the driveway, and Mom comes down the steps. She's dressed in a nice little red house dress with a shawl over her shoulders. "Y'all made it," she says, and she gives me a hug, and then she immediately turns to Tanya as if she's known her forever, and she embraces her. I'm so glad to finally meet you, she says to Tanya. Travis has told us so much about you. Tanya smiles and hugs my mom back, and I can tell they're going to be thick as thieves. My dad comes down and he shakes my hand and he embraces me in a bear hug, and then he hugs Tanya and he gives me the okay sign while he's hugging her. We ended up having a wonderful evening. We ate dinner and Mom showed Tanya the Christmas tree with the personalized decorations she's collected over the years. And then we all get on the Polaris and Dad tours her around the ranch, showing off his prized bulls and the various pastures where we kept the horses and the cattle. He tells Tanya all about the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Texas Cattlemen's Association that he's being given the next night in Houston. We ended up staying up late, drinking beer, and Mom shows Tanya a bunch of pictures from when I was a kid, and they are laughing and having a great time. Any doubts I have about Tanya are erased as I see how she interacts with my folks. They are as comfortable together as a pair of old shoes, and I make the decision right there that I'm going to end up marrying this girl someday. The following evening, we drive into Houston over to Texas Pride, the steakhouse where the Cattlemen event is being hosted near downtown Houston. It's a sprawling building with a huge State of Texas sign lit up on top with green and red floodlights, with a cowboy statue standing out in front, carved out of bronze. The building is decorated in red Christmas lights, and various elaborate Santa and reindeer displays are stationed out front, with a beautiful nativity scene with life-size models that are located near the door. Tanya's mouth drops open with how stunning the building is decorated. There's some kind of commotion near the front door. A group of about a dozen young people are gathered at the door, and they're holding various signs barring entry to the folks waiting to get in. What the hell is this? My father mutters as we pull in. Well, Tanya looks over at me, and we both know what's going on. It's a protest of some sort. We've seen plenty of them over the past year up in Boston. We don't see near as many of these down here in Texas. Dad parks the car, and we all get out and walk over to the front where all the folks are gathered. There's about 40 folks who are all part of the Cattlemen Association, and they're waiting on the sidewalk. The protesters are chanting something about the evils of ranching and global warming and the murder of livestock. I can see a number of signs they're holding. Stop the murder. I'm me, not meat, with a picture of a cow. Ranching is evil. The protest is being led by a small little fellow dressed in jeans with a shirt that looks more like a blouse. He has a beard, but it also looks like he's wearing lipstick and maybe some rouge on his cheeks. A large, bald young man who has to be at least 6'6" is standing next to him. He wears a muscle shirt and a scowl. About 20 men in cowboy hats and their wives are waiting patiently on the sidewalk in front of the building. My dad walks up to a burly man with a long gray beard and a black hat. What's all this, Gerald? My dad asks. Seems like this PETA group don't like us much, Gerald said. They ain't letting us in, and the staff inside is too afraid to come out. We called the cops, but I doubt that they'll even make it over here. We'll see about that, my dad says. He walks over to the protesters, and my mom tried to grab his hand, but he gently brushed it away. The large fellow steps aggressively in front of my dad to stop him from reaching the door. What's going on here? My dad asks. The large guy doesn't say anything, but the little fellow with the lipstick and the beard steps forward. This place is closed this evening, he says. You guys need to go find somewhere else to eat. My dad stays as calm as ever. Of course, there's no police around. There never are when you think that they might come in handy. The sad part is, it's unlikely they would have done anything even if they were here. I believe you're mistaken, son, my dad says. We have an event here this evening. The large young man barring the door steps towards my father. You just misgendered her, the large fellow screams. Unfazed, my dad doesn't move or even blink. Misgendered who? My dad asks. The woman standing in front of you. My dad looks at the little fellow with the beard and the lipstick. Well, I surely didn't mean to, my dad says, just as calm as ever. He's got a beard. You did it again, the big fellow says, and he takes another aggressive step towards my father, and Tanya grabs my hand and she squeezes it. The bearded guy puts his hand up to back the big guy off. Just go, the little fellow says. We're not letting anybody in. You guys are going to have to go somewhere else. I don't think so, my dad says. I can appreciate that you folks have something to say, but maybe you ought to find a way to say it that doesn't inconvenience everybody else. The small guy with the beard looks around, and for the first time, it's starting to dawn on him that maybe he picked the wrong place and the wrong group for his protest. The group of cattlemen are standing patiently on the sidewalk behind my dad, and his group is gathered closer to the door, and all eyes are on the little guy, and he shifts a little nervously on his feet. Just when I thought that maybe the little fella had concluded that it might be best to just drop this little protest, he decides to draw a line in the sand, and he doubles down. "We're not backing down to a bunch of cisgendered white men," he says. "You all need to leave now." The small crew with him erupts in cheers, and they begin chanting something about the right of cows to live, and the big fella glares at my father, trying to intimidate him. My dad smiles. "That may not be the most wise decision, son," my dad says. The big fella erupts. "That's the third time," he screams, and he lunges at my dad while throwing a wild roundhouse punch, and the folks around the bearded guy gasp. Well, my dad sees the punch coming, and he deftly takes a small step back, and the punch misses him by at least 6 inches. The big guy is off balance, and he has a surprised look on his face, while wondering how in the hell the old man dodged him, leaving him punching nothing but air. And his face is even more surprised when my dad kicks out his right boot, connecting with his knee, and the big guy falls to the pavement, grimacing in pain. My dad calmly kneels beside him, taking the time to straighten out his cowboy hat. The problem with you young folks today is you get all spun up about this or that cause, and you don't give a thought as to what other people might think, my dad says. He helps the big fellow to his feet. "If you don't want to eat meat, then don't. But you can't make other people stop just because you don't like it." The bearded little guy is wide-eyed, and the others in his group look to be scared. They're not expecting a group of old boomers to put up any resistance. The big guy is staring at my dad with hate in his eyes. "Why don't you fellows go stand over there with your signs?" my dad says, pointing to the area on the side of the door. "Protest away. Just don't interfere with those of us who want to go in." The big fella charges at my dad again when my dad turns slightly towards the door, and he gets in a sucker punch that lands on my dad's jaw right up near his lip. I start to step towards the big guy, but my mom holds me back.
No.
My dad smiles, and he spits out a bit of blood. Everybody watches him in silence as he slowly removes his jacket. "I guess you want to be ornery," my dad says to the big fellow. His voice is steady, and he's as calm as if he's having a conversation with a child on a park bench. "You know, I've got a bull that acts like that sometimes." He turns to the big guy, and the big guy lunges at my dad again, throwing another wild punch, and my dad steps away, and at the last second, the punch misses him by a mile. "Your problem is you've never been properly disciplined," my dad said. The big guy throws another wild punch, and this one also misses, and my dad ducks to the left. "You all think what you have to say is so important that you have to shout at folks," my dad says, slowly turning to follow the big guy as he continues to stalk around my dad. "Maybe if you tried being a gentleman and being nice to people, you'd get a lot further. Why is it you all seem to be so angry all the damn time?" The guy comes in for another punch, and my dad again anticipates it, and the punch misses, and my dad kicks him in the ass with his boot. The cattlemen all chuckle, and the little fellow is looking like he's about to throw up. The big guy charges my dad one final time, throwing another roundhouse punch, and my dad easily ducks it, and the punch misses, and my dad jams his knee again with his boot, and the big guy falls to the ground with a grunt. My dad kneels next to him. The bearded fellow rushes over, and he kneels down to check on the bigger guy. "It's time you grow up," my dad says. "You've had your mom and dad kissing your asses all your life, and apparently nobody ever told you that you can't always get what you want. Say what it is you have to say to the world, but don't act surprised if not everybody agrees with you. Being a bully ain't no way to get stuff done. All it does is piss people off." My dad again helps the big guy up. He looks over at the little fella. "And if you want to call yourself a woman, that's great," my dad says. "I'll end up going along with it, and most folks will as well. Just don't get so mad if someone who doesn't know you misgenders you. Cut folks a break. Shaving the beard might help a bit." The big fellow looks like he doesn't want any more to do with my dad, and the group of protesters has opened a path to the door. "Now," my dad says, "we're going to go in for my party. You guys are welcome to come join us, as long as you can behave. We got free beer and wine and plenty of stuff to eat that ain't got no meat in it. I'll even give you a listen if you can talk without yelling and carrying on. And with that, we went into the restaurant and we had a party. My dad got us in without ever even throwing a punch, and we were joined by half a dozen activists who took my dad up on his offer. Like I said, old school Texas stuff, never beaten. That's my old man.